books on Dr. King, as you well know, looking primarily at his cultural roots and legacy, taking into account his impact not only on the civil rights struggle in this country, but human rights struggles worldwide. So I'm still involved in that after more than 30 years and working at presently on a number of works on Martin Luther King Jr. and looking primarily at his legacy and what that means for us as we continue the struggle for a nation and a world free of racism and sexism and all of the other isms.
And dealing with social justice.
That's right, social justice, human dignity, equality of opportunity. Those are major themes in my writings. And as you well know, they were very important for Dr. King, who a lot of people don't realize was very much concerned not only about what was happening in this country, but what was happening throughout the world in terms of the violation of people's human rights under systems of colonialism and neo-colonialism, etc.
So very good. And so, Dr. Baldwin, let's see if we can sort of define what we mean when we say talk about African Americans and sports and social justice. We've got about 2 minutes before this segment.
I think there's a long history of African American athletes using sports as a platform for addressing social justice issues. And of course, we get into that history a little later. But as you well know, African Americans have always had to use whatever platform was available to deal with these issues. We've done it through the sphere of music and art. We've done it through the sphere of athletics and of course, the church. Whatever avenue was available for pursuing human rights and human dignity and freedom and justice, we've used that platform. And of course, sports figures have been no different. They've always used sports as a kind of platform, and that goes back, as you well know, as far back as Jackie Robinson, who in 1947 broke the color barrier in baseball. He became the first African American to play in the major leagues in baseball.
You're very good, and of course Jackie Robinson was only one of the first in baseball, but there were many others in all kinds of sports that sort of distinguished themselves to such a point that they drew attention.
Exactly. Now Jackie Robinson is very important because he was a pioneer. I think we have to call him a pioneer in the struggle. He didn't do very much when he was playing baseball because, for obvious reasons, he was concerned very much about reprisals. But after he retired from baseball in 1957, he became a writer. He wrote columns for the New York Post and the New York Amsterdam News. And in those columns, he addressed racial issues. He actually worked with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1950s and 60s, addressing issues from Jim Crow in the South to poverty to South African apartheid. So there was a very close relationship between Jackie Robinson and Dr. King.
Very good. And so in a real sense, Dr. Baldwin, as you will probably explain later on, that these individuals played a significant role in terms of the sports, but at the same time they were able to reach out and make people understand that they did enjoy a special situation that was not generally open to other Africans at the time.
They brought that same competitive spirit that they took into sports into the field of human rights and civil rights.
Okay, and so we'll take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
Colin Kaepernick.
However you want to do it, you know. So this is an 8-minute segment, and I think we've laid the foundation for whatever you wish to deal with in reference to that, and that's one thing that, you know, sports is so important in terms of what we do, because everybody's waiting on the Super Bowl now and playoffs.
It's yet another platform for us as African Americans to address injustice.
That's right. That's
Paul Robeson said it.
You
know, W.B.
Ready, stand by.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Louis Baldwin, former professor at Vanderbilt University, retired professor from Vanderbilt University, and he's given us some information in reference to African Americans, national sports associations, and civil rights in a real sense, Dr. Baldwin. I mean, we might have muddled the title in reference to moving them around here or there, but essentially what we're saying is that athletes have played a significant role in terms of the history of Africans dealing with social justice.
Yes, and it began not only with, it begins with Jackie Robinson. Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. called Jackie Robinson a sit-inner before there were sit-ins, a freedom rider before there were freedom rides. But it didn't stop with Jackie Robinson. He was a pioneer. You have to also look at 1968. The Summer Olympics in Mexico City, when Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists, the Black Power salute, was a protest against social injustice in the United States. And you look, of course, at Muhammad Ali and his activities. In 1960, he was an Olympic gold medalist, won the heavyweight boxing championship in 1964. But in 1967, he refused to respond to the draft and to get involved in the war in Vietnam. And of course, he lost his boxing title. His license, boxing license, was suspended. And of course, he became an outcast. And you look, of course, today at Colin Kaepernick, who is involved in the kneeling activities at football games. And we have to keep in mind that kneeling has long been a part of the black struggle for justice. You had what we call kneel-ins
in the streets.
Albany in 1962.
Yeah, very good.
You had kneel-ins in Selma in 1965. So this is nothing new. But the idea of taking a knee is very, very symbolic. It means, of course, resistance against the struggle of injustice, and particularly the issues involving police misconduct and the relations of African Americans with law enforcement. I think these people like Colin Kaepernick and others in the pro football, NFL, are making essentially the same statement that Jackie Robinson made, that Tommy Smith and John Carlos made, that Muhammad Ali made, and that, of course, is that we are not going to tolerate injustice. Taking a knee is very constitutional. It means standing up for right. Okay?
And it's not against the United States flag.
It's not against the flag. It's very much. Dr. King always said regarding the sit-inners that by sitting down, they were standing up for the very best in the American dream. And I would argue by taking a knee, Colin Kaepernick and others are standing up for the very best in the American dream, which involves, of course, this idea of the right to protest for rights.
Rights,
The right to protest
That's what the First
right.
Amendment should be about. I think
Exactly.
you've talked about the Second Amendment quite often on this particular show. But that, that's part of the First Amendment to be able to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good.
So I think Kaepernick is standing in a long tradition. He's being accused of disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the national anthem, disrespecting even our troops who are fighting abroad. But that's not what it's all about. I think LeBron James was probably right when he says that Kaepernick stands very much in the tradition of people like Martin Luther King and others, in the sense that he feels that if you're going to make a statement about social justice issues, you got to not only speak, you got to act. And there will be...
and be prepared for those who are going to try to act against you.
Exactly,
Yes,
because there will be consequences in terms of material and the physical. You're going to lose a lot of resources. And of course, we know now that Colin Kaepernick is a free agent. He hasn't been hired by any particular NFL team. So he's suffering some of the same consequences and abuses that Martin Luther King Jr. suffered, that Jackie Robinson suffered, that Tommy Smith and John Carlos suffered after they gave the Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. So there's a price to be paid. And we see that happening, of course, in the case of Colin Kaepernick.
And certainly it's in sports, but it's also all across the board.
Exactly.
Those who oppose anything that's against the Constitution, against the status quo,
Exactly.
will be subject in a real sense to whatever was
Reprisals,
done, reprisal or whatever.
Abuses, and of course, people have always been outraged when black sports figures take a stand for social justice. It happened, of course, with Jackie Robinson. It happened with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. It happened with Muhammad Ali. And of course, now, of course, it's happening with Colin Kaepernick.
And I'm reminded, as you well know, it happened with David Walker.
Exactly.
David Walker's appeal.
In 1829.
That's right. That went way back.
He published the appeal in 1829.
That's
1830, they found him dead.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
So it's, there are all those.
There's always a price to be paid.
There's a price to be paid.
Materially and sometimes physically.
That's right. And so we ought to support those individuals who are willing, because when they stand out, they are standing for all of us who are not standing out, for whatever reason we have for not standing out. They're out there.
They're making a statement, not only in terms of this quest for civil rights, but the quest for human rights. And human rights are very, very important, and it speaks to the global situation, I think.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, I think we're getting ready for the second commercial break, and I think that will give us a chance to go into this last segment, because I think this is the second segment, is it not?
Yeah.
Oh, is it? You know, I've been dealing with this. I've been dealing with this all day long,
Exactly.
and so I sometimes become confused in reference to the second or the third segment.
Yeah.
But this is the end of the second segment, and so what we'll do when we come back during the final segment, we'll give you an opportunity to further elaborate upon anything that you wish to talk about dealing with the current athletic situation, or some of the things that you might have wanted to talk about before you got here, but it never crossed your mind.
All right.
But now this will give you an opportunity to talk about those things that you said that you wanted to talk about before you got in that chair.
Thank you.
And that'll
so
make
much.
sure that you won't leave here saying that I should have said. I think that's the way all of us feel when we find loved ones that have passed out of our lives, and we all wish that we would have said something at that particular time. But whatever you think that you ought to say, this will be your time to say it when we come back during this last 10 minutes. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
Thank you.
I've got one show after this, and this will be 5 shows.
That's
for the day.
good. You're done for the day then.
Yeah, but not for the day. So you've not had a chance to do anything in reference to some of the other things you're trying to do?
Well, I have a chapter in my most recent. Yes.
Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and he's giving us some information relative to African Americans, national sports associations, and civil rights. And so, Dr. Baldwin, within that context, let's give you the last 10 minutes to talk about some of the things that you'd like to talk about.
I'll begin with Dr. King. Before he died in 1968, he felt that sports figures should also be a model for how we address issues of social justice and social concern. And he saw Muhammad Ali, as a model for that. You know, for what he expected of sports figures throughout the athletic world, that they too had to get involved in this struggle for equal rights and social justice. And I think what we've seen with Colin Kaepernick in the National Football League is that players throughout the league have joined him in these kneeling ceremonies, I call them. And that's very, very important, because they're concerned not only about the black community's relationships with law enforcement the criminal justice system, but they're concerned about the larger issue of civil rights and human rights. People should be treated as human beings. And I think that this is what Dr. King had in mind. And so when people like LeBron James and others referred to Kaepernick as standing in that tradition, I think they're quite right. Because in the movement today, and you know what's happening in our world today, you know what's happening in the nation today, there's a move toward isolationism in terms of international policy in this country. Civility is declining.
Almost disappeared in many
Exactly.
instances.
You have problems with economic injustice and the rise of poverty worldwide, the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I think it's very, very important for not only preachers and churches and people in the music field, but also people in sports to be involved, to have not only a voice, but to actually participate in actions, in protests, in acts of resistance and defiance, to bring about what Dr. King called this beloved community.
You have absolutely no idea, Dr. Baldwin, unless you recognize that when they pay to go out to a stadium and you've got 103,000 people looking on, you have no idea of the kind of influence that you have in reference to the words that you use.
That's what Dr. King always said. He said sports figures are known internationally. They are respected internationally. They bring a certain kind of competitive spirit to the sports, to the football fields, to the basketball courts, to the tennis courts, okay, to the boxing rings. And you need to bring that same kind of competitive spirit to the struggle for civil and human rights. He saw Ali as exemplifying that, okay? He saw Jackie Robinson as exemplifying that. And I think as we look to the future, we need athletes to stand up. We already see that in the Pro Football League. We don't see it enough in basketball. We don't see it in boxing. We don't see it in tennis. We don't see it in these other national sports. And I think we need to see more of that, because if we're going to create a society and a world free of oppression and free of injustice and free of economic inequality, we got to have people in all fields, all endeavors involved in this particular struggle.
And no matter how they might do it, either by kneeling or whatever they might do, or speaking out or whatever, there's always one way to do things that you can do it safely. You don't always have to jeopardize a contract in order to protest, you see. And so there are ways that you can do things and et cetera. And you believe that that's a platform that should be used much more.
I believe very much, as Dr. King believed, that you got to be willing to sacrifice materially and physically in order to bring about the kind of changes that we need in this world and in this society. And I think he saw in Ali and Jackie Robinson and others that capacity to look beyond themselves, to really what? Devote their lives to the service of humanity.
And so, Dr. Baldwin, we've got about 4 minutes before we end this show for today. And what I'd like for you to do now is to reflect upon some of the things that you wanted to say dealing with this particular topic before you got here, but you've not had an opportunity to express. And so that you won't leave here getting down the road and saying, I should have said. This is your should have said moment.
Exactly. Now, my concern today is that not enough people in pro sports really, are supporting Colin Kaepernick. You have owners of pro football teams, other pro sports, who have not really made the kind of statement that they can make. It's not enough for pro football players to take a knee. You have to also see that in pro basketball. You have to see it in tennis. You have to see it in other areas of sports. And we're not seeing enough of that because the struggle for a better world continues in the 21st century. And we know that the problem of the 21st century, as W.B. Du
Yeah,
Bois said in the 20th
it
century, will
has been.
continue to be the problem of the color line. It will be the problem of the religion divide. It would be the problem of poverty, which divides the haves from the have-nots. So we need to see more figures in sports taking a knee during the singing of the national anthem. And it has nothing to do with disrespect for the national anthem. It has nothing to do with disrespect for the nation, disrespect for our military. It has everything to do with not only the right to protest for right, it has everything to do with creating a society and a world in which all people can enjoy the fruits of democracy.
And you don't necessarily have to threaten a reputation in reference to this, because your very being an individual who's out there, prominent in the sports and et cetera, your very being attracts to you and sends out from you how things ought to be.
Yes,
so you don't necessarily have to go out and kneel, but by the way you act when you get on the field, by the way you act when you speak to folks, and by the way you react to things like that, that says a lot about civil rights and et cetera.
Dr. King said the same thing about Jackie Robinson, that when he got on the baseball field, he showed black people that you need to strive for excellence in whatever field of endeavor you pursue. He also showed white people that you need to break down these barriers that separate different races. So it's always important to be the very best that you can be in your field of endeavor, while also devoting your services and your competitive spirit, your talents, your gifts, to the struggle for human rights.
And we have an opportunity now, Dr. Baldwin, coming up on the playoffs and all of those activities that millions of folks will watch on television and et cetera over the next 2 or 3 months, the Super Bowl and et cetera. We have an opportunity to evaluate all of those individuals who ought to have civil. You know, some folks act as if they don't need civil rights or don't want civil rights. And I think that as an athlete, if you go on and you conduct yourself in such a way that it indicates that you enjoy civil rights, if you do it with L-O-V-E, love, respect, understanding, goodwill.
And a determination to really honor what is the primary tradition, I call it, of this country, that is to respect freedom.
That's it.
Okay, to pursue freedom as a higher human ideal. And if you do that, of course, I think you're in the best tradition of democracy in this country.
And you will have all of the accolades that you could ever want if you're out there as a great athlete.
Yes, and I hope during the Super Bowl, during the college football playoffs, that we will see some
manifestation.
Some manifestation of some acts of protest, against what I see today as a kind of erosion of democratic principles.
Okay, and Dr. Baldwin, let me end the show for today, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is Kwanzaa and the Great Debate. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about Kwanzaa and the Great Debate, Ms. Marie Hall, Ms. Terrell, and Dr. Al-Hadid. And Ms. Hall, let's start off with you by having you to give us some information in reference to your background, education, and experiences. Take a couple of minutes. Ms. Jamila, will do the same in terms of her background, education, and experiences. And Dr. Al-Hadid will take us out of this segment with some statements in reference to his background, education, and experiences, and then we'll have an opportunity to move on dealing with this particular show today.
All right. Well, good morning, Dr. Haney. My name is Maria Hall, and I am from Nashville. I am the founder and chair of Kwanzaa Nashville. I've always been here in Nashville. I went to high school here, continued on to Vanderbilt University. I then pursued my law degree in Memphis, and so I'm a practicing attorney here in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Very good. Jamila.
Hi, my name is Jamila Terrell, and I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, came to TSU, a graduate of the Africana Studies Department, went on to do some graduate studies in Nairobi, Kenya, and finished up with an MBA in Global Management. I currently am the Restorative Practice Assistant at John Early Middle School.
Very good. And Dr. Al-Hadid.
Yes, I'm originally from Apartheid, Alabama, which is technically Montgomery, Alabama. I grew up there, got a degrees from George Washington Carver High School, then Alabama State University. I left there and went to University of California, Santa Barbara, where I became a part of the Black Studies movement. I spent a year in Nairobi, Kenya, and traveled to about 14 countries in Africa. Made the pilgrimage to Mecca, got my degree from UC Santa Barbara, came to Tennessee State in 1973. I served there for 35 years. I am currently retired, past chair of the Department of Africana Studies, Tennessee State University, and the founder of the Great Debate.
Very good, and I think that considering everything, we've got an excellent panel here dealing with these two topics, Kwanzaa and the Great Debate. Jamila, let's start off with you by having you to make some statements in reference to Kwanzaa, and of course I think Ms. Hall, you're prepared to deal quite a bit with that. And let's have the two of you talk about that, and then we'll allow Dr. Al-Hadid to say something about the Great Debate, because I'm familiar with him and the Great Debate as well as this other topic, but especially the Great Debate. Let's start off with you, Ms. Hall.
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm here for Kwanzaa Nashville, which is an organization that is a partnership of several organizations here in Nashville that all those organizations, their purpose and initiative is to bring African American people together and also to make sure that we have cultural programming here in Nashville for the advancement of Black people. And so we have organized together here in Nashville around the season of Kwanzaa, where we have 7 citywide events throughout the week, starting January 26th all the way to January 1st. But I think it would be great that Dr. Al-Hadid could share with us a little bit of history about Kwanzaa to kind of set the background of why we do what we do here in Nashville now.
Well, Dr. Al-Hadid, why don't you say something about Kwanzaa, and we'll skip over Mr. Terrell, and then talk about Kwanzaa, and we'll start with Mr. Terrell when we come back during that second segment.
Yes, well, Kwanzaa is a cultural holiday, and it's based on 3 institutions: the family, culture, and the community. It was started in 1966 by Dr. Marlon Karinga. I had a chance to meet him in California during the time of the infancy of Kwanzaa, now 67, 68. And at that point, he was developing an organization called US. Kwanzaa comes out of a Pan-African idea, which says that the fundamental contradiction in the African American community is a problem of cultural identity. In other words, we take the position of saying that slavery stripped us of our cultures. We came over here Yoruba and we ended up being Negro. We came over Hausa and ended up being colored. So in order for us to really find some serious solution to our problem in terms of unity, purpose, and direction, we have to ground our movement in culture. Malcolm said it's best when he said that we need a revolution. We need a revolution of the mind. So Kwanzaa brings about that revolution of the mind. Here in Nashville, the Kwanzaa movement started around 1984-85. And at the same time, interesting enough, the African Street Festa started, and we also started the Great Debate. We also started planning for the creation of the Africana Studies Department. So that was a serious cultural consciousness movement starting from 1984 to this present point.
Very good. And of course, what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. back in 2 minutes with the second segment. Now, where do we want, which we want to pick up with you, Ms. Hall?
Yeah, we'll talk about the
Okay.
actual Kwanzaa in Nashville and
then,
what we're doing.
And so this is 8 minutes.
Okay.
Take about 4 minutes of that. Take about 3 minutes of it, and then we're going to let him end this show for this segment with about a minute. And when we come back the last time, we're going to let him start this 10-minute segment and talk as long as he wish on that 10-minute segment, put it on her next, and then we'll let you come back to me with that, okay?
Sounds good.
Now, who did I say was starting?
Yeah,
You?
I will.
Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Ms. Hall. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Ms. Hall, Ms. Terrell, and Dr. Al-Hadid about Kwanzaa and the Great Debate. And of course, we would like to start with Ms. Hall dealing with Kwanzaa.
Yes, so Dr. Hayden, we have here in Nashville a jewel, something very special that only a few cities in the U.S. actually have, and that's 7 nights of Kwanzaa celebrations, where several organizations have come together and organized these events. And on the first night here in Nashville, on January 26th, we have our big kickoff event that'll be at Nashville School of the Arts that is hosted by Sankofa African Drum and Dance Company, which happens to be the drum and dance company I am the artistic director for. And then following that, we have our Kujichagulia night, which is self-determination. That'll be hosted by AACA, African American Culture Alliance, over at St. Luke CME Church. On the third night, we have for Ujima, our great debate, which Sister Terrell will talk about shortly. That will be a great asset and change to the events that are happening this year. On our fourth night, we have Ujamaa, which is our Black Business Expo, which is centered around cooperative economics under Kwanzaa, where we have several businesses and vendors coming out, a big marketplace for the community to come and support our Black businesses. On the fifth night is Nia, where it's focused on our children, which will be at Ray of Hope Community Church, hosted by Nia House Montessori School. Sixth night is Kuumba, which is around creativity. And then our last night, we will have an Imani finale that's over at Napier Community Center that is centered around bringing everyone together around the arts. And so we have an exciting week. Please connect with us on Facebook and Instagram under Kwanzaa Nashville.
Very good. Ms. Terrell?
Yes.
Let's say something about the Great Debate.
So my favorite principle is Ujima, which is collective work and responsibility, and I'm honored that the Great Debate Honor Society is going to host a town hall Great Debate on December the 28th at Clark Memorial Church. The topic is public policy debate. TSU should be awarded a land grant reparations and a world-class Africana Studies department to overcome a century of arrested development and cultural alienation.
And so this is all part of the Kwanzaa celebration,
Yes.
but you're dealing specifically with the Great Debate. And I think that if we go down to Dr. Al-Hadid, and to have him close us out this particular segment by talking about the Great Debate, because I think that he's had the Great Debate with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and just go on, Doctor, give us some information about the Great Debate and tell us about it.
Well, the Great Debate is a cult and intellectual forum within which we debate contemporary issues. Ms. Terrell has just indicated the issue that we're going to deal with this year, 2017-2018, and that is that TSU should be awarded land grant reparations and a world-class Africana Studies department in order to overcome a century of arrested development and cultural alienation. Now, in essence, what that means, when we were brought here in bondage from Africa, there was fundamental alienation from our culture because our languages and our religions and our family systems were taken from us. There was fundamental alienation from our labor because the labor was free, and we worked under duress in this country and other parts of the world for centuries. And then, of course, we were alienated from our land. We were taken from the motherland, and we didn't have any land here. So that in that sense, the great debate looks at three perspectives from a dialectical standpoint, more or less a Montian dialectical standpoint, which means balance, harmony, unity, reciprocity, justice, truth. In that sense, we're looking at the ideas of two great men, Dr. Martin Luther King, who took the position that in order to change America and make a whole, we had to move from a position of integration using the method of Gandhi and the spirit of Christ. On the other end of that perspective, we call that the antithesis. We look at the ideas of Malcolm X, who we call El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, coming from an Islamic point of view of self-determination and Pan-Africanism. And then, of course, we try to reach a synthesis of these two positions because we fundamentally feel that in our life now, as 40 million African Americans who are still colonized, that we think like Malcolm, but most of us talk like Martin, because it takes a certain kind of courage to speak truth to power the way Malcolm did it. But either way you do it, you only get 3 years because Dr. King was killed in 1968, Malcolm was killed in 1965. So in that way, because when you start speaking truth to power, then there are consequences for that truth. But in order to do the great debate, what we're trying to do now is to look at what has happened to Tennessee State University. For more than 30 years or so, Tennessee State University, a land-grant university, was not given this land-grant match. We have another land-grant university, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where they were given more than their share of land-grant match. Sometimes they were given as much as 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1. And from Tennessee State became a land-grant in 1958 and has not received its land-grant. So at this point, we are owed close to $200 million in land-grant reparations. And if, Dr. Hayne, if you can just imagine, Tennessee State has an endowment of $51 million. University of Tennessee has an endowment to close to $2 billion. And it's because of that arrested development. In other words, those 4 campuses, the Knoxville campus, the Chattanooga campus, the Martin campus, and the Memphis campus, they developed at the expense of Tennessee State University. So University of Tennessee created what we might call an academic monopoly, but at the same time created a sharecropping system. So TSU is an 1890 land grant, University of Tennessee an 1862 land grant. Tennessee State is basically sharecropping on the UT land grant plantation. In that sense, so we want some parity. We're not going to be satisfied until Tennessee State University is competitive and comparable with the University of Tennessee. If the University of Tennessee has a law school, Tennessee State should have a law school. University of Tennessee has a medical school, Tennessee State should have a medical school. If the University of Tennessee has 4 campuses, not just a downtown campus, University of Tennessee has 4 freestanding campuses with presidents and a whole infrastructure. And so we need all that. We must have all of that. And we have to understand that Tennessee State only has 2 choices. It can either be the queen bee along the Cumberland fertile shore, or it could be a pawn in the chess game of higher education. And what I mean by that, Tennessee State, as you know, is the only public university in the city of Nashville. The only public university in the city of Nashville. And it is the only public HBCU in the state of Tennessee. So it is in a very strategic position so that it can flourish in this so-called IT city, or Music City, or the Athens of the South. You see, you have 4 HBCUs in Tennessee, and they are quite different. You have a liberal arts HBCU, which is Fisk University. You have a land-grant university, which is Tennessee State, a medical school, which is Meharry, and a theology school, which is ABC.
And of course, we'll take this final commercial break, Doctor, and then we'll come back and we'll allow you to complete some of the information that you're given. We'll be back with our audience following this very short commercial break. This is the last 10 minutes.
About 15 seconds, but he'll be able to do that.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And so, Ms. Hall, we're going to start with you and we've got 10 minutes. Take about 5 minutes of that. Take about 4 minutes
Okay.
after that, and then we're going to let him make a last statement, 1 minute, 30 seconds,
And I
and
may
then.
come over here after I wrap you and just do this, if that would help you. Just the,
I'm good if I don't say anything else.
No,
I'm good.
he ain't got nothing else to say.
Our ancestors have
Okay.
spoken. So
Yeah.
I'm
All
gonna zip
right.
my lips.
This is the last 10 minutes. We'll get out of here.
Just let them have the 5.
Yeah.
And we'll be happy.
Okay, we'll be all right.
Yeah, 50-50.
we are ready. Stand by.
Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. The topic is Kwanzaa and the Great Debate. And we're fortunate to have again 3 individuals to talk about Kwanzaa and the Great Debate, Ms. Hall, Ms. Terrell, and Dr. Al-Hadid. And so, Ms. Hall, let's give you an opportunity to start us off during this final segment to make some statements in reference to either Kwanzaa or the Great Debate, and take about 4 minutes of that. And then Ms. Terrell will take about 4 or 5 minutes to talk about her special part of this topic, and then we'll allow Dr. Al-Hadid a last minute to make some statements, and I'll stop him and cut us off for today. Appreciate that. Start off, Ms. Hall.
Sure. Well, Kwanzaa National, part of its mission is to educate the community about the celebration of Kwanzaa. And just to give a little bit of information about that, Kwanzaa is celebrated from December 26th to January 1st.
It is, yeah.
Oh, goodness.
He's gone.
All right.
Have to cut.
Okay.
I was like, you brought him over here.
Is it?
It will. I would've-
Is that a wasp?
Yeah, that's the wall.
I knew it was going to come and mess with us.
Okay, let me
I doubt if you can kill him.
That
pass.
thing has been here for a week.
Yeah, yeah.
Can
Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Ms. Hall, Ms. Terrell, and Dr. Al-Hadid, and the topic is Kwanzaa and the Great Debate. Ms. Hall, let's see if we can have you during this last segment to make some final statements about anything that you wanted to talk about before you got here, and then Ms. Terrell will also do the same thing, and we'll allow Dr. Al-Hadid to make a statement in reference to goodbye, and then I'll take it and we'll end it for today.
All right, great. Well, Kwanzaa Nashville's mission is to educate the community about the celebration of Kwanzaa, which begins December 26th and it goes all the way to January 1st. And the principles that are celebrated or that we focus on each night come from the Kiswahili language. And the first night is umoja, all right, which means unity. It's to strive for and maintain unity in our families and community, nation, and race. The second night we celebrate Kujichagulia, which is self-determination, and it speaks about defining ourselves, naming ourselves so that we don't rely on others to identify and name us. Then we have on our third night, Ujima, which is collective work and responsibility. That's about building the community together and making our brothers and sisters' problems our problem and solving them together. Then on the fourth night, we celebrate Ujamaa, which is cooperative economics. That's about building and creating our own businesses, buying and selling together, and creating an economic base in our communities together. Then we have Nia, which is about purpose. It's about using our collective vocation to make our communities better, using our skill sets and our careers to make our communities more beautiful. And then on the sixth night, we have Kuumba, which is all about creativity, using our creative intellectual capital, creative arts, to make sure that we leave our communities better than the way we inherited it. And then finally, we end with Imani, which is faith. It's about continuing to, we understand that we can't reach a goal without the struggle. So constantly believing that our future will be better than our present and continuing in that struggle.
Mr. Rails, make some final statements in reference to the great debate.
Well, one of the things with the Great Debate and the Africana Studies Department, they always focused on taking the campus to the community and the community to the campus. And so this is an opportunity for us to do just that. Normally, the Great Debate has been held in the classroom setting where it is a part of the course. But this time, we're actually in the community, and we are doing a production that will be hosted during Kwanzaa.
And so you've got quite a bit of information scheduled for the great debate. It's no longer just academic kind of thing. You're taking it out to the community. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, we definitely are taking it out to the community because the community is actually very excited about studying and learning more about Martin and Malcolm outside of just the dream and by any means necessary. So it's an opportunity for people to go deeper into the men.
As a matter of fact, I think that Dr. Al-Hadid really started in a real sense the great debate situation at Tennessee State University. Did you not, Doctor?
Yes, sir.
And so let's take a few minutes to tell us about how you started that and your inspiration for starting it on the campus at Tennessee State University. You've got about 5 minutes to talk about that.
Well, the Great Debate started in 1985. It was a humble attempt to connect a generation of students, excuse me, with the teachings of Malcolm and with Martin, because many of them were the children of the people that came of age in the 60s, the baby boomers. So we were trying to help them to understand Malcolm and Martin, and we also dealing with some contemporary issues. The issue that was most at hand at Tennessee State was the issue of the stipulation of settlement. This was a part of the Geyer case in 1985. It was decreed that Tennessee State University should become half white by 1993. And we felt that it was an apartheid law, and we started the first issue of the Great Debate was apartheid in South Africa at Tennessee State University. And it's almost like a circle, because here we are in 2017, and we are still talking about that fundamental contradiction. Now we're talking about getting reparations for the fact that Tennessee State has been culturally alienated and a victim of arrested development. So the Great Debate went on for a long period of time, from 1985 to the time I left in 2008. And then it also served as the prologue for the creation of the Africana Studies Department. We created the Africana Studies Department in January of 1994, and it was inspired by all the series of great debates that we had from 1984 to 1994. And that's how the department came up, and pretty much the Africana Studies Department, as we originally envisioned it, was based on the Great Debate paradigm. Now that we have been reduced to a minor, we need to resurrect it in the Nile Valley. So Dr. Wasini Yefru, who is a specialist in Nile Valley civilization, he's originally from Ethiopia. He speaks Ge'ez and his own language was Amharic. He writes those languages, so we're now trying to reinvent the Africana Studies Department using the classical African civilization as a model. But the Great Debate is still on the scene. I have returned to the campus, serving as the adjunct professor. I taught the Great Debate in the fall semester. I also will be teaching in the spring semester. And our focus now is to build a community of New Africa. As you know, we have Germantown, which is fairly close to here. But the question is, where's Africatown? And we feel that Africatown should be from Tennessee State's University, which is along the Cumberland Ferry shore, all the way up to Rosa Park in Germantown. So if there's a Germantown, there has to be an African town. And we want to claim the whole Jefferson Street corridor as New Africatown. And that would include Fisk University, Tennessee State University. And because what's happening now is we have a lot of gentrification going on. Now, gentrification is a euphemistic word for imperialism. And basically, the African-American communities mean colonized. What is colonization? Cheap land, cheap labor, and cheap raw materials. We are victims of economic exploitation, political oppression, and social degradation. And with 25% of the population, we are not getting justice at the hand of the city government. We're not getting justice at the hand of the state government. So we need to use our votes. We need to form a cultural movement so that we can push back on those fundamental contradictions.
Doctor, make a statement about, since you're talking about Jefferson Street, about the new museum that's going up between, I think, Jefferson and 8th Avenue. Say something in reference to that facility that's developing.
Well, that's another one of the blatant contradictions, because originally the museum should have been a museum of African American history and culture.
Okay.
And the script got flipped by somebody we elected that we thought would be representing us. Now we're in the basement across from the Grand Ole Opry House. We don't have anything in common with Grand Ole Opry. We need to be on Jefferson Street, where, you know, Jimi Hendrix used to play, Count Basie, and, you know, all of those greats, you know, Duke Ellington and so forth. And we have our 3 institutions. We need to have our own museum right on Jefferson Street. So where we have the 3 universities, where we have a history. Jefferson Street is our cultural and economic mecca. So the city is obligated to do right by us. Not only are they, you know, took away our music, look what just happened with General Hospital. General Hospital now is being opted by HCA, by the same city government that we voted for, thinking that they would represent us. So everywhere we turn, people are getting our votes, and we are still victims of taxation without representation.
Very good. And of course, let me thank the 3 of you during this last minute of the show for today for coming by and giving that excellent information, not only about the great debate, but about Kwanzaa as well. And I can only testify to the fact that the information that you've given is information that will be eye-opening for those individuals who might not know either about the great debate or about Kwanzaa. And I want to thank you for bringing that information by to us. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week to another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. Do what you